Have you ever dreamed of traveling the world making movies, but didn't know how to actually make that happen? Well, welcome to Season 2 of Live Life for the Stories, and wow, do I have some stories to tell you this time. I'll be walking that fine line of trying to tell entertaining stories with a good lesson without trying to damage the career or reputation of anyone I'm referencing, so I'll be using phrases like one of us or one of the crew. And out of respect for our current partners, I'll avoid discussing relationships any more than necessary. But now that I'm talking about adults, usually trying to be recognized for their work, I will use full names to promote them and what they do. Let's get to the story. With a script, a camera, and whatever we could carry on our backs, 3 of my best friends and I backpacked through Europe and shot a feature film in 5 countries before we started college, and managed to get it distributed internationally through Amazon Prime. I always get asked how we managed to do that, so I'll walk you through it, from pre-production to post-production, and what we learned along the way might help you. Lesson 1. Plan everything, even when not to have a plan. In case you missed the last season, I was enrolled in a film production trade school called the HARA Motion Picture Conservatory during my last 2 years of high school, and that gave me the filmmaking knowledge I needed to make a film like this. January 21st, 2012 was the first day of the HARA Motion Picture Conservatory's spring season, split into 2 parts, Spring 1 and Spring 2. Spring 1 focused on professional actor training, but even at 17 years old, I already knew I wanted to use this season to prepare myself to make an international feature film. Which sounds daunting, and it should. We had to prepare in a lot of different ways. First of all, I had to know what we were making. Each weekend of HARA classes gave me 2 days to think about and write the film, and I decided I wanted to make a coming-of-age travel comedy with some heartfelt moments. Sunday, January 22nd, was the second day of HARA Spring I, but that was actually the day I shot Daisy Destined to be a Search Dog from Season 1, Episode 11, so I wasn't able to focus on my film just yet. But the next weekend, January 28th, I really solidified what I wanted this film to be. Each student had a journal for each season of HARA, and that day I wrote down the basic concept in my journal. Europe trip. The characters begin as American teenagers looking for adventure and a way to have fun. They come back almost enlightened by the freedoms, differences, and unique ways of life they've found. On January 29th, while in class doing another journaling exercise, I wrote about why I wanted to make this film. Life is fresh and ripe with adventure in faraway lands, and everyday people can see that in their own lands. I want to share the idea that any and every day holds secrets, fun, laughter, excitement, and adventure, if only one would seek to find it. My theme is that anyone can do anything. It is important to me that the audience is amazed by what we are capable of doing and making from nothing. The amazement will stem not only from the stories themselves, but the idea that we, no people of any importance, are able to accomplish great things and amazing feats. The audience will be amazed that we have become extraordinary. I had high hopes, but how powerful is that? I wrote Carpe Diem in an effort to show people that ordinary people are capable of becoming extraordinary. I wanted people to find success without excuses, and to be meaningful to those around them. And I wanted to be the example that it was possible. Keep in mind, I didn't even know if it was possible, but I believed it was. It makes me proud of who I was back then, and how I wanted to change the world. Foreshadowing. One of the writing exercises that day was to write down the greatest fear of the character we were playing. Eerily, I wrote that my character's greatest fear was to fall from heights and become paralyzed. I got goosebumps when I found the journal and saw what I'd written. I'll get to my accident eventually, but let's just say I'm very lucky I'm not paralyzed. Fun fact! Remember Population 5, the band from Season 1, Episode 4 that had allowed me to use their music for the score for my short film Plan of Action? I had thoughts of asking to use some of their new music in Carpe Diem, and they were performing that Friday night, February 3rd, at the Alternative Cafe in Seaside. Let me tell you, it was a great show. They rocked it. But I believe it was the last time they ever performed live, so I was just lucky to be there. The lead singer and guitarist, my friend Sam Griffin Ortiz, sang lyrics that one of the other musicians' parents didn't like because he cussed in them, and the band unfortunately was dissolved soon after. It was too bad because they had a cool sound that I really liked, and I'd follow Sam's solo career for years. But unfortunately, This was my first example of tying my career to another that didn't continue. For example, if Population 5 had gone on to become a very successful band, or if I'd become an A-list filmmaker, having that collaboration would have boosted the career of the less successful person considerably. However, tie your career to others that don't continue with it, and the worth of the collaboration essentially ends when the collaboration itself ends. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this is what people are talking about when they mention hedging your bets in Hollywood. Which creatives will you tie your career to? If you even get a choice. Anyway, the next morning, February 4th, I was back in HARA classes, continuing to develop Carpe Diem, this time focusing on the cast. I wanted 4 main characters: a long-distance couple, 1 man and 1 woman, a male comedic relief, and a player character, a man who was oddly wise, yet also a second comedic relief. I knew that I wanted to go to London, Edinburgh, Paris, and Barcelona by then, but I didn't have a lot of free time to work on it yet. On Saturday, February 11th, we spent a HARA class learning to pose for headshots. Boom, boom, boom. You want to create a 3D area, right? Not a flat, this is me. You want to provide depth. Learning how to look for headshots, as well as what clothing to wear, that was super important, because the next day, February 12th, we had a headshot photo shoot for anyone who had taken HARA's Spring I class. That was a really nice perk for anyone pursuing acting, because good headshots can cost hundreds of dollars. So the photos from that day were what I'd be submitting to auditions once I got to LA. Unfortunately, I had to skip the last 2 classes of HARA Spring I on the 18th and 19th because I went on a trip to Los Angeles for the first time to visit USC, UCLA, and Whittier College. I thought USC was my number 1 choice, everything I wanted, but I knew that affording it would be tough even if I got in. UCLA was a close second, still great, but not quite the program I wanted. And Whittier College was the backup because it didn't offer a film production major at all, but it was more affordable, still in LA County, and easier to get into than the other 2 schools. Luckily, the weekend after I got back, HARA had their most important day of Spring I. Instead of a premiere of a film, this season had an actor showcase on February 25th, with each actor presenting a different monologue from a famous movie. The monologue I chose was delivered by John Belushi from the classic film National Lampoon's Animal House, directed by John Landis.
This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
This feels like a type of foreshadowing in 2 ways, because oddly enough, I'd stay at a hostel named after John Belushi a few months later, and I'd have to shoot a recreation of an entire scene from Animal House less than a year after that. So I was lucky I'd already familiarized myself with the movie, but we'll get to those stories soon enough. Spring II began on March 3rd, 2012, and similar to the previous year's HARA Spring season, Spring II focused on screenwriting, directing, and pre-production to prepare for that year's summer short films. This season had 2 of the original ATIC 5 in it, one of which was Aaron Shee, one of the leads of Carpe Diem, as well as 5 returning HARA students, and Mike and Brittany still taught it. So I was comfortable with the environment and the people in it, and that allowed me to flourish creatively. I'd had the itch to write the script, but between my spring semester my senior year of high school and varsity track and field Monday through Friday, HARA on weekends, memorizing the monologue for the actor showcase, and the trip to LA, I hadn't had the time I'd wanted to get started. But we purchased tickets for the flight that week, so I knew I had to be ready. So while everyone else was writing their 5 to 10 page short films, I threw myself into writing Carpe Diem. My first draft was 13 pages. The script we left with was 58 pages, and the finished script was 68 pages, so 7 to 14 times the length of the other scripts. Side note, people often think of a film as being about 1 minute per page, but our final cut wasn't 68 minutes, it was 92 minutes. So take those estimates with a grain of salt. It really depends on the writing style of the author and how much of the film has dialogue. Lesson 2. Figure out how to make your dreams practical. My last spring break as a high school student was eventful. On March 8th, Selena Welling, one of the other leads in Carpe Diem, flew back from London to visit me, and we went to Lake Tahoe because her dad ran a small hotel out there. We took a Greyhound bus to get there, and it was an absolutely awful experience. The bus got stuck in the snow, water leaked on us from the vehicle's roof until we were soaked and shivering. Because of the delay, we missed our connecting bus and had to spend 6 hours wandering around Reno, Nevada until the next bus arrived. We basically lost a whole day. After that, I only used Amtrak buses and trains to get around, and I had a significantly better experience, but that might not be the case everywhere. What it did teach me was to be careful with public transit, and that would be very important when we got overseas. However, this Tahoe trip meant I wasn't there for the second HARA Spring II class on March 10th, but I had gotten the homework assignment before leaving, and that assignment was to make a film in a style called poor cinema, the film version of a type of play called poor theater, which focused on acting with the body, no props, no costumes, or fancy sets. The challenge in poor cinema was to use a DV recorder, basically a DVD recorder, to shoot a film in chronological order, able to be watched straight from the disc with no editing at all. It was the only time in my life that I have ever done that. However, we knew we had to film this carefully, because with 2 people in a hotel room with a home movie camera, I knew the chances were high that this could come across looking like a porno. And I was a minor still, and I didn't want people to get the wrong idea. I wondered how we could work with that situation, though. And I think we came to a pretty good conclusion. A lot of horror movies use the juxtaposition of sex and fear to get your heart racing. And the closer those are, the better it does. A lot of amateur horror films do appear to be more sensual in the beginning. Is the woman seducing that man actually a succubus? Are the people making out too distracted to hear the serial killer break in? That sort of thing. So we leaned into that. We made the characters be a couple celebrating an anniversary in a hotel room, but the twist is that it's a slasher film. Fun fact too, I was a lot better about building hype around projects back then, and I remember posting hints on what this film was about. For example, we filled a bathtub with a red Jell-O mixture for fake blood, but I posted the receipt that just showed Jell-O and a spray can of whipped cream so that people would speculate as to what the hell kind of film we were making up in Tahoe. To be honest, I didn't promote or build hype for films later the way I did in the early days, and I should have stuck with that more. I was ballsy back then, and it got people talking. Now, why did I include this story about Room 29 in the episode about pre-production for Carpe Diem? Well, it's because Room 29 was essential in developing the style of Carpe Diem. When we shot Room 29, we had to figure out how both of us could appear on camera without a camera operator. Through the use of tripod shots, handheld POV shots, and close-up inserts, we were able to shoot the film as though we had a director of photography, even though we didn't even have a camera operator. Now, is this as good as having a real cinematographer? Of course not. It was doable, not ideal. And so I knew that the Carpe Diem script had to avoid having all the characters on camera as much as possible. But I knew it would be possible to shoot scenes with all of us on camera when we needed to. So I added a plot point where one character gets separated from the rest of the group, and therefore edited the script to make it more easily shootable than it would have been. Keep things practical when you write a low-budget film. I say as I wrote mine to be shot in multiple countries. Anyway, on March 17th, we showed our poor cinema films in the HARA Spring II class and got feedback on them. And in my journal that day, I wrote things like clubbing, London, argument between friends, strip club Paris, financial issues, hookup Bordeaux, camping fiasco. So I had some ideas on storylines and scenes I wanted to happen in the movie, but we didn't end up going to Bordeaux, and we almost never mentioned money in the film. So the script was still very much in development, even though we were less than 3 months from beginning principal photography. Fun fact 3. We were only getting busier as graduation got closer. So after class that evening, another HARA student, Sitara Masalamani, who's still working in the industry to this day, threw a party at her house that a number of other HARA students attended. You know, we danced, goofed off, played games, did a group photo shoot. We even took an unusual photo where everyone put their hands on the butts of the people on either side of them. I guess that shows we were all pretty close back then. But it's a night I remember surprisingly clearly, because it was one of the last times a lot of HARA students got to hang out before we all went our separate ways for college. And it was the last time the 4 main cast members of Carpe Diem saw each other before our flight to Europe. And the cast all being friends with each other on a film like that was incredibly important. To skip ahead, by March 24th, I had an itinerary listing London, Edinburgh, Loch Ness, Paris, and Barcelona, but we hadn't added Italy yet. But by Tuesday, April 3rd, when I made a Prezi for English class about how to make a Europe trip, I'd added both Italy and Germany, but the price was now around $3,000. Germany ended up being way more expensive, and we couldn't speak German, so we cut it from the list, and our cost per person decreased by around $1,000. By Sunday, April 8th, the script was 54 pages long, had all the core elements of the film. In hindsight, the main thing missing is the story being told to a friend, but we didn't add that until much later. Lesson 3. Success takes sacrifice. On April 14th, one of the original ATAG 5, Ammon Hardy, one of my best friends, flew back into town for our senior prom. It was great to have him back for a bit, especially since I would have felt lonely going to prom on my own. And so, for prom 2012, a group of us rolled up in one car, and we got a couple of guy group photos and a group photo with the Joplin sisters, but then I asked the photographer to take a photo of me on my own, thinking it both proved I went alone and I could Photoshop it later. Here's the thing though. You don't have to be a saint with singular focus to succeed. Although I had goals I wanted to accomplish and people I wanted to accomplish them with, I wasn't locked in, eagle eye on the prize here. I was a 17-year-old that had to intentionally and forcefully work hard to narrow my focus to avoid the distractions around me that could have derailed the film before it even got started. I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again. Life is about what we're willing to sacrifice in order to get what we want more. These sacrifices are not easy. It was a battle raging within me, and I think that's worth acknowledging. On April 18th, I got the Canon 60D camera that we'd shoot Carpe Diem with as an early birthday present. My dad and my uncle each paid for half of the camera with an 18 to 200 millimeter kit lens. And that same day, one of my friends saw the first feature film I'd acted in, Instructions Not Included, air on TV. So it really felt like things were coming together at that point. Side note, for anyone worried about camera quality, that camera cost less than $1,500 and was shooting 1080p in 8-bit, aka worse than my current iPhone camera. And we got our film to pass the quality control reports to get us onto Amazon Prime. So I'd pay more attention to the lenses you're using than the camera body. Your cell phone could be more than enough if you use it correctly. Fun fact 4, I turned 18 years old on April 22nd, 2012, and I wanted to do a camera test for my birthday. So my friend Max Houston picked me up after I'd gotten out of HARA that day.
Gonna chill, shoot some bows. Here's my buddy Eric. Sup, dog?
He took me to a friend's place.
Happy birthday, Eric. Glad you have that camera. Fancy smancy, sharp turn, up the gargantuan hill.
Woo! We made our way over and around a barbed wire fence with my new camera, recurved bow, and a quiver full of arrows, as well as a crossbow that we'd gotten Max for his 18th birthday.
Now we come upon the abandoned quarry.
And we got to a flat area between the hills of gravel and rock. We set up a target and took shots at it with bolts and arrows as I recorded different moments on the camera. And it was a great time. Got me more familiar with the camera and its settings. And in the back of my mind, I wondered what we could have made if I'd had a camera like that back when we were shooting Two Graves. Foreshadowing. At the end of the day, a friend said,
"May you live long enough that you don't become old and infirm."
Which kind of sounded like a sound of one hand clapping nonsense saying to me, the kind meant to cause spontaneous enlightenment. But I actually almost didn't live long enough to become old and infirm, so it's a little creepy in hindsight.
And this concludes the birthday.
I have good hair.
Interestingly enough, on April 24th, we had our senior retreat, and we were each asked to record a video to ourselves when we're 10 years older.
If you could go on a trip to anywhere in the world for free, where would you go and why?
Want to go to Europe?
It comes up in those videos that there were still 5 of us on board for the Europe trip at that point. We dropped down to 4 people less than 1 month before departure, and I had to scramble to edit the script to accommodate a major change like that. Lesson 4. Your experiences color your content, so adjust accordingly. The main reason I didn't include any parents in the script of Carpe Diem was because I wanted a comedy, not a dark drama, and I didn't know how to write about family without other things coming out. For example, I made sure I was comfortable with the equipment before we started production. I edited and posted footage from my 3rd camera test, calling it Adorable Puppy versus Fruit. But it had a hidden meaning that was perhaps more vengeful than it seems. You see, growing up, my dad had called a lot of people a fruit. For example, if you seemed a little off, maybe drunk or high in public, my dad would say you were acting a little fruity. If you wore a t-shirt to a wedding, you were dressed fruity for the situation. If you were outside of a store telling everyone to put tinfoil on their head before going through the front doors, you were just a fruit. So when I titled my video Adorable Puppy versus Fruit, I wasn't referring to the fact that the puppy was playing with oranges and a cantaloupe. I was referring to the fact that my mom was crossfaded as hell rolling on the floor playing with that puppy. But I couldn't name it Adorable Puppy versus Drunk Woman, especially because it was my mom. So I went with something that had enough meanings that no one would inherently know what I meant. But as a creative, it's important to keep in mind how your past experiences and traumas will color what you make, and to adjust accordingly, such as, for me, not having a parental figure in my travel comedy. HARA Spring II's 10th and final class on April 29th was the last class I was ever a HARA student for. It felt great to be done, but just as high school had a graduation, the upcoming premiere of a long shot felt like it was HARA's graduation moment. The long shot premiere happened on May 11th, 2012, the day before the staged reading of the scripts from Spring II, but in hindsight, I noticed a difference between my senior prom and this premiere that I think is worth noting. I was willing to go to prom alone because it was personal. It didn't harm anyone but me, and even then, it wasn't terrible. However, I was not willing to go to the premiere alone, because in my eyes, that would reflect poorly not just on me, but also on the film, for having a co-star who couldn't manage to bring anyone to the premiere. So I asked an actress friend who was also a HARA student, Megan Joplin, and she agreed. What's telling about the difference is that I seemed more worried about my career and how it looked to the outside observer than I did about my personal life and how I looked to the outside observer. And I think that's part of why I'm able to make these videos at all. I care way less about what people think of my life than I do what they think of my work and what can be learned from it. Why is that? Well, we often have a lot more control over what we make than how we live, so it can be much more reflective of who we are deep down. HARA Spring II had their staged reading performance of the scripts for the short films on May 12th, 2012, but I didn't read the Carpe Diem script, and I didn't even attend, because if you remember from Season 1, Episode 12, I had to go shoot Ulysses that day, because I'd put it off by working on Sonnets to Orpheus instead. But now that we had a script, we had to figure out cost. On May 13th, we started an Indiegogo campaign, but it didn't help us much, if I'm being honest. Aaron Shee and I put a lot of work into it, but we only got $500 from the campaign, most of it from family members. What we learned was that it takes wealthy friends and family and an expected return on investment in order to raise money. But wait, Indiegogo is for donations, not investments, and there isn't a return on donation the way there's a return on investment, right? And that's correct. But donors are looking for a different kind of return. They want to be part of something they can talk about, something recognizable, well-known, impactful, novel, or charitable. So about 80% of our budget had to come from our own savings. Aaron Collin and I had each saved between $2,000 and $3,000 over the past few years to be able to take the trip, and Selena had saved about 1,000 British pounds. And the camera and film equipment were already purchased thanks to my dad, my Uncle Richard, and my Uncle Steve. But that was our entire budget, somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000, and the vast majority of it went to personal travel expenses. Nothing for VFX, marketing, post-production, cast and crew salaries. Nada. Right? We had the opportunity to shoot the film, so we went for it. And figured funding a film that's already been shot is a lot easier than funding a film that doesn't exist. In hindsight, I wouldn't recommend anyone do that for a number of reasons that I'll get into later, but here's a good example. To cut through the absolute blizzard of info that most people get on a daily basis, a lot of creative projects in the 2020s have up to or over 50% of their budget dedicated just to marketing, just so people become aware that this exists. But as 4 unknown kids with no recognizable names attached to the project, we'd have had an uphill battle making people aware that this film existed, even if we'd had a marketing budget. Selena and I created the itinerary of which cities we'd be staying at and for how many days, and we saved every penny we could to keep it within budget. You know, hostels over hotels, camping over hostels, grocery stores instead of restaurants, that sort of thing. We even replaced Bordeaux with MA because Selena had family there that we could stay with. So, what was the plan? We would fly to London, England first, then we'd take the train up to Scotland to shoot in Edinburgh and Loch Ness, After that, we'd go back down and take the ferry across the English Channel to northern France, where we planned to shoot in Paris and MA. Then we'd take a train to Spain for San Sebastian, Pamplona, and Barcelona, and after that, we'd take a train along the French Riviera, or Côte d'Azur, to get from Spain through France to Italy. Finally, we'd go to Venice and Florence in Italy before flying back to London for our return flight to the US, which was way cheaper than booking a flight from Florence to SFO. It was essentially 5 countries in 5 weeks, and it was absolutely insane trying to get it done. But once we had an idea on how much travel expenses and lodging would cost, we had a better idea of how much we could spend on equipment. On June 9th, 2012, my Uncle Steve, being the experienced search and rescue runner, traveler that he is, walked us through which backpacks, sleeping bags, and other travel gear would be both light and durable for long-distance journeys. So this backpack and this Pelican case, to keep the camera safe inside it, are 2 of the best investments I've ever made, right? This backpack has been to 11 countries over 13 years. And on top of that, I packed it and brought it home every holiday during college. As you can see, it's still in remarkable shape for the beating it's taken for over a decade. And it clamps around the waist to keep the weight on my legs and off my shoulders, which allowed us to carry a significantly heavier load. We took 2 hikes while wearing the backpacks to make sure we'd be physically up to the task, because when fully packed, the backpacks weighed 40 to 50 pounds. Mine weighed about 45 pounds, but since I only weighed about 130 pounds at that point, it was over a third of my body weight. I had to make sure I could handle that, because I might not have been carrying the heaviest backpack on the trip, but I did have the heaviest backpack to body ratio by quite a bit. And unfortunately, that's where this next lesson comes in. Lesson 5. It often takes both health and wealth to be successful as a creative. Oddly enough, it had always been a toss-up as to who was going to go on the trip. I think it needs to be said that it was Ammon Hardy, one of the original A-Type 5, who had the idea to travel to Europe before college. This trip was his idea, not mine. I just added the idea to film it along the way. Originally, it had been 3 of us, but as we told more people, the trip had expanded all the way up to 6 of us. Unfortunately, 1 couldn't go due to familial money problems, and 2 others couldn't go because of medical conditions that prevented them from hiking with backpacks that heavy. That left the 4 of us that went on the trip, but we felt bad about the people that couldn't go, so we tried to include as many people as possible once we got back. A good amount of my childhood and high school friends appear in the beginning of the film because of that. However, I think it's worth noting that 3 people who could have had lead or supporting roles in this film, through no fault of their own, were unable to go. This is a prime example of something I despise about filmmaking. The industry is usually reserved for the healthiest and wealthiest of people. I cannot understate the immense strain that filmmaking puts on your physical and mental health. But unfortunately, those conditions are often created in an attempt to save money. For example, if we could have afforded more hotels and motels instead of some of the hostels and camping, it might have made the trip possible for another friend to go. But we didn't have the money for that. So we had to have people who were physically capable of hiking miles through the woods with heavy backpacks in order to camp. A lot of filmmakers cut costs as much as possible to get started, but then never open up the opportunities to more people once they no longer have to cut those costs. It's unfortunate, and I'll talk more about this in future episodes, but a good example is the myth of the 12-hour day on film sets. I grew up believing that 12 hours was the only option, but Clint Eastwood was famous for doing 8-hour days when he directed films, something much more normal as a workday and manageable for people with physical or mental restrictions, giving significantly more turnaround time than you'd get on a 12-hour day or a 16-hour day on set. Why wouldn't other people do this? Well, it increases cost and production time. Why would others do this? It's safer and healthier, allowing the correct amount of sleep for people that need to be driving or operating heavy machinery the next day, and allows people who aren't healthy enough for back-to-back 12-hour days to be able to participate. It's something I didn't focus on back then, but the main reason that Hollywood is exclusionary in those ways is just to increase profit margins. We weren't a Hollywood studio, but those same reasons are why when we arrived at the San Francisco International Airport on June 12, 2012, only 3 of us got in that plane to London, instead of 5 of us. But you'll have to tune in next week to see how we almost had to cancel the trip on our third day in London.
Man, this trip is gonna be awesome.
I know. Can't believe Julia's gonna come with us.
I can't believe we haven't eaten in 3 hours.
As long as we get a place to stay in London, I'll be good.
Either way, 5 countries, Europe, nude beaches and nude bitches. Let's go.